Good evening, it's 9 p.m. This is the India Development Debate. I'm Sandeep Gurumurthy joining you live from our news centre in New Delhi. Straight to the big debate tonight. The gloves are off. It's turning out to be an all-out duel between Finance Minister Arun Jaitley and his predecessor P Chidambaram over Budget 2018. First, it was a former FM P Chidambaram who trashed the budget by putting the spotlight on job creation, increase in MSP for farmers and the ambitious health insurance scheme, terming them as the three jumlas of the Modi government. Unsparing in his criticism, the former FM raised questions on the government's fiscal math, revenue generating capacity and its ability to absorb any external shocks. Today, though, it was Jaitley's turn to strike back. The finance minister presented a series of data to put the spotlight back on UPA's economic mismanagement that led to slow growth, double-digit inflation and soaring fiscal deficit. The barrage of charges and counter-charges on the budget and the state of the economy by the government and the opposition ahead of the crucial election season. That's our topic for debate on tonight's India Development Debate. Joining us on the debate this evening, we've got Dr. Arvind Virmani, who's of course president of Forum for Strategic Initiative and president Chintanlive.org. He's also been a former chief economic advisor, has experience serving the government. We've got R. Sriram, who's of course the resident editor West at the Economic Times. We're also joined on the show this evening by eminent economist Anantha Nageshwaran, who's joining us from Chennai. Anantha Nageshwaran, independent consultant, Vansite Consulting. Also joining us on the show, two political representatives, Syed Zafar Islam, spokesperson of the BJP, and Mohammad Khan, spokesperson of the Congress Party. Thank you all so much for taking time out and joining us on the debate this evening. Before I come to you, Dr. Virmani, I want to first play a small clip of the duel between the former Finance Minister P Chidambaram and the Finance Minister Arun Jaitley on the specific issue of the current account deficit.
Every deficit target has been breached by the budget. Fiscal deficit has been breached. Revenue deficit has been breached. Effective revenue deficit has been breached. I want to know what is the current account deficit number for the current year and what is the current account deficit number for the next year.
Oil prices will rise. What will you do about current account deficit? What is the current account deficit of your last 2 years? 4.2%, 4.8%. 4.2%, 4.8%, unacceptable level of current account deficit. और एक तिमाही जो थर्ड क्वार्टर 2012 का था, उसमें तो शायद आपने वर्ल्ड रिकॉर्ड तोड़ दिया होगा 6.8%. In one third quarter of 2012, you had 6.8% current account deficit. So current account deficit 4.2%, 4.8%. सरकार बदल गई. 0.5%, 1%, 1.5% इस रेंज से बाहर आज तक करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट नहीं गया. और हमें भाषण सुनने को मिल रहा है कि आप करंट अकाउंट का क्या कर रहे हैं.
Okay, let's keep the politics aside. Dr. Virmani, there are specific issues that we want to address, and let me take the current account deficit first with you. Is the government being complacent on the current account deficit, especially given the turmoil that we're seeing in the global financial markets and the rising global crude oil prices? We're likely to see a reversal of funds from emerging markets to developed markets. It's a no-brainer that it's likely to happen as the Fed continues with its tightening, tightening spree. Is the government being complacent on the current account deficit?
See, the foreign exchange management is part of the RBI's mandate. When we were in the finance ministry, we always, of course, watched and alerted and discussed with the Reserve Central Bank. That's one point. So it's not that the finance minister has to be concerned about it every day. Obviously, if there are major shocks or there are major changes, that is something that the finance minister has to pay attention to, number one. Second, we've seen this up and down of oil prices many times before. Of course, the direct effects are what everybody focuses on, and they are clearly important. when oil prices go down, you tend to get an improvement in the the current account deficit and vice versa. But there are counter effects, and let me mention one or two. People, I think, focus too much on the oil price direct effect. The indirect effects, for example, if oil prices go up, the Middle East gets more earnings, you get more remittances from Indians working there, you tend to get an increase in demand for Indian exports from there, etc. So there are countervailing factors. We all agree that the net effect, of course, is negative on India, so there is no doubt about it. And third and final point, most forecasts that I have seen of the likely impact of oil prices, which everybody expects to rise, though there are variations in how much they will rise. The IMF thinks the rise will be about 12%. There are private forecasters I've heard who talk about 20% over the full year. And there are people who say, oh, from the low point, it's already risen 30%. Leaving, obviously there's no perfect forecast, but by and large, I expect, my judgment is that the current account deficit may go up to between 2 and 2.5%, which is generally manageable. Historically, we've seen that level of current account deficit is not a serious problem.
Anantha Nageshwaran, comment on that. 2.5% is about as much as the current account deficit could rise to, and it's not such a big concern. It's generally manageable, says Dr. Virmani. So, is it a big cause of concern for you at this stage?
Not at all. I would endorse Dr. Virmani's observations about the relative importance of current account deficit for the Finance Minister. First of all, data for 2017-18 are available only for the first 2 quarters. The next 2 quarters, including the one that ended in December and then in March, will be available much later. And if you look at the IMF forecast, they are talking about 1.5% current account deficit for 2018 and 1.6 for 2019, pretty benign numbers. So if oil price keeps high, given the global stock market volatility and likely uncertainties on the growth front, one would argue that the oil price is probably peaked. So I don't think the current account deficit has a one-to-one correspondence with the fiscal deficit. We need to know what is happening to the private sector savings and investments as well. So I really can't see the reason why the current account deficit should be a concern just because there has been a fiscal slippage of about 0.3%. I just don't get it.
Okay, current account deficit is not a concern. That's the word coming in from 2 economists. Syed Zafar Islam, simple question, and I'm going to take some of these questions raised by former Finance Minister P Chidambaram. He's an eminent politician and an eminent Finance Minister, so his questions should be debated threadbare, and that's the idea of this debate. The Finance Minister has answered many of them, but let's debate them. So, Syed Zafar Islam, the former Finance Minister, says every deficit has breached the target set by the government. Will the impact of these high deficits be inflationary? Currently, WPI is 3.6%, CPI 5.2%. What are the estimates of average WPI and average CPI for 2017-18 and 2018-19? Asks P Chidambaram.
See, when Mr. Chidambaram is saying that every deficit has been breached, he is primarily referring to fiscal deficit, but he has to see when he was the Finance Minister, what was the fiscal deficit number, and how it has been brought down by our government purely following the fiscal prudence policies, and 3.3 or something which the market was also expecting, given the structural reform which has been undertaken this year. Particularly, I am talking about GST, and if this number slippage is also purely statistical, because the Honorable Finance Minister has very clearly stated that the GST number is only for 11 months. The revenue number is only for 11 months, because GST March number will reflect in April. So it is primarily statistical, and there is in terms of revenue, I think there will be no slippages at all. But since the number was, whatever statistic was available, based on that, it has been seen that it has slipped for a small number, it has slipped by 0.3%. But in terms of current account deficit, let me ask Mr. Chidambaram, as the Honorable Finance Minister has clearly stated, that currently in 2017 is 0.7% of GDP, and even if it budgeted fiscal deficit number, even if it breach beyond that, assuming that oil prices for external fact purely because of the external factors and oil prices, we see upward pressure in oil prices, yet it may not go based on the two economists which said that maybe around 2%. But then we have seen era in 2013, 2012 where 4.5%, 6%, 4.2%. That time it never worried them. But today when it crossed, even if assume it breached 2%, then it is bothering him. So that is something which they are making a statement just for the sake of making a statement, because no economist will buy that argument. It is sustainable level, something which one should not overly get worried about that. What is more important? That overall health of the economy is very good. The structural reforms.
Saeed Zafar Islam, we've heard the talk on structural reforms. You've made a point. Let me get a quick rebuttal from Mohammad Khan. Mohammad Khan, current account deficit of UPA for the last 2 years was 4.2 and 4.8. There was a quarter when the current account deficit shot to 6.4%. As far as fiscal deficit is concerned, last 3 years of UPA, fiscal deficit was 5.9, 4.9, 4.5. Why are you preaching how to manage deficit to this government?
Well, when this government first came to power, I was under the impression that they would do a better job by their own admission. 4 years now, we're being told, compare yourselves to the UPA record. I'm sorry, sir. When you make extraordinary claims, you beget extraordinary expectations. We're holding you to your own standard. Look, the reason why the fiscal deficit number becomes relevant is in light of the greatly reduced oil price benefit these people have enjoyed for 4 years. Having been a quarter of the price that prevailed during the UPA era, your fiscal deficit numbers should also reflect a certain degree of restraint. Unfortunately, however, there seems to be a breach. Now, when we ask you for more details, you never provide us with the same. We don't think there has been spending in agriculture or in other sectors of crucial importance, and the data for that is still unavailable. We finally say this. This is not just about the fiscal deficit. This is about your mishandling of the economy. And the reason we say this is because there hasn't been, and also, may I also add, Sandeep, low oil prices for them, global markets on the rise. These are two benefits we did not have. We were coming fresh off the back of the global financial meltdown in 2008 and 9, and the Congress government had to guide India through a period of enormous crisis, but we did not let growth slip below 8%, even as per the old standard. They, despite having a revised standard with a lower base year, are unable to match that. Even though the higher number delivers lower growth, they're still unable to match the UPA's numbers. So it is a very simple question.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Why are you not able to manage the fiscal deficit within the terms put forth by you?
Okay, why are you not meeting your fiscal deficit? I guess, Sriram, let me come to you. You know, are people, and sitting in Mumbai, you speak to a lot of corporates, a lot of top market watchers. Are people now tired of this, exercise of blaming the UPA? Every time a sort of question is being asked on the economy, the government resorts to blaming the UPA. What was your track record? What did you do on the fisc? What did you do on the current account deficit? Are people tired of that blame game right now?
I think people are generally definitely tired of the blame game that is really happening. Tired of the fact that whenever there are questions put forward to this government, the government responds by saying that the UPA did this badly and the UPA did that badly, and therefore we have done this better and we have not done it as bad as the UPA did. Yes, there is definitely some amount of irritation, some amount of anger, some amount of the fact that, look, I mean, you guys have had a run for 3-4 years now. Why can't you do this better? But I think also one must make this point that when the NDA government came to power, when this NDA government came to power in 2014, it had two major jobs, two major responsibilities. One is repair and the other was rebuild. Now, we got to analyze this government's performance and how well they have done on both. How well they have done on repairing the damage that was done in the preceding 4-5 years, and how well they have done on actually rebuilding infrastructure, rebuilding growth, and rekindling the animal spirits, so to say, of the economy. And if you look at that, the picture will be very different.
And repair and rebuild, they've done a decent job on repair. Rebuild is where the question mark is. Dr. Virmani, I want to get this one thing again out of the way, which is this whole point that has been made on the reason why there's been a slippage is a statistical one. The point that Syed Zafar Islam made and the point that the Finance Minister made as well, because they got GST collections only for 11 months. So this is more of a statistical slippage. As an economist, do you buy that argument?
So there are 2 or 3 parts to that very quickly. One is the last 3 years, let's say 12, 13, 13, 14, 14, 15, 15, 16. There clearly the trend was downwards and encouraging. The Finance Commission also gave some forecast. There were earlier or recommendations, and the government had by and large had actually stuck to the targets, even though even last year people were saying that they should or could violate. Then we come to the current year. There really, if you look at the budget numbers, they are the year which is still in process. There are really 2 factors, and the numbers are pretty clear. One is the non-tax revenue, particularly from the RBI, is down significantly, and that can be related to monetization and all the expenses of demonetization, etc. And the second part is clearly the tax part, which instead of 9 months, the 8 months, because of the changeover, because excise and other taxes end in one particular month. The GST starts, but the collections come in later. That is a valid point, and both these factors, however, are temporary. So they will go away by next year, and so the current thing is just certainly not a structural problem. It's the sources are identified. My personal disappointment was only that they didn't do a little more divestment to take care of this temporary problem. Now we come to the third part, which is the next year, and here it is a little puzzling to me actually. In my view, the estimates are fairly conservative. And in fact, maybe there's a cushion. I would not be personally, I would not be surprised if they perform better than their budget estimates. So there's a little bit of uncertainty there, which could be on positive or negative side. I would say more on positive, though some people have been talking about the negative side.
Fair enough. Okay. The other big question is what is going to kickstart investment? And Anantha Nageshwaran, expenditure, the government is, because of fiscal constraints, has sort of tied its self a little bit, and the expenditure is projected to grow only at a little over 9%, whereas nominal GDP is projected to grow at 11.5%. So I'm trying to understand what is the lever for growth, because if the push is not going to come from the public sector, the private sector is not investing in any case. So what is going to be a lever for growth? What is going to help kickstart more economic activity?
I think the expectation on the investment revival hinges on the fact that the government has finally bitten the bullet on banking sector recapitalization, and the banks have been provided funds, and it will be provided funds in the course of the coming financial year, and they can begin to lend, and hopefully that will in a virtuous cycle of capital formation. And I think we are seeing that in the fact that the credit growth is already into double digits. And if you look at the order books for manufacturing companies that came out along with the RBI monetary policy day on the same day, that is picking up quite a bit as well. So I think we are probably seeing some tentative signs of an investment revival in India, although we must point out that the kind of slump we had in investment and savings has a lot to do with the legacy that the government inherited in terms of over-investment, over-optimism, and also a lot of dubious projects. So it will take some time for the full can be expected with a reasonable degree of confidence, simply because at least one part of the sheet problem has been taken care of with the government recapitalizing the banks.
Sriram, comment on that. Are you seeing early signs of revival in private investment? Private investment. Do you get that sense that large industrial houses are now getting into investment mode? And I understand the fact that bank credit growth has now moved back into double digits after being at what, so 5%, which was a multi-decade low really. But with the recapitalization of banks, and this is something that even the RBI points out, the bet that it will lead to kickstarting of the investment cycle. Realistically, do you see that happening over the next 6 months?
Sandeep, I would be very skeptical of that. I have been making this point publicly for quite some time now, and I will reiterate this now. I think it's going to take some time for the big industrial projects to come on stream, for the big corporate houses, the big conglomerates to start saying that yes, now there is demand back and now we have our capacity utilization back above 80% or around near 90%, and now is the time to go back and spend big money on the big projects. I think there are 2-3 things happening here. One is that if you look at, this has been a 2-speed economy, right? For the last 3-4 years, this has been a 2-speed economy. We have the consumer on the services side, the consumption side of the economy doing quite well, as is reflected in auto sales and retail credit growth and all that. And we've had the industrial economy being very, very sluggish and lagging behind. And that is still continuing. And I think there have been, the problems have also been compounded by the fact that the real estate sector, which makes a big part of the big part of the corporate, you know, the capex cycle, they are not doing too well because of RERA. So I don't see the big industrial projects. I think there will be a lot of projects of 500 crore, 1000 crore, 1500 crore, debottlenecking, brownfield investment, all that will keep happening. But the big ones, when you're talking about plus 5,000 crore or plus 10,000 crore, those are still very few and far in between. And one must also keep in mind the fact that the big corporates, the big conglomerates have actually just about finished their big investment plans. Reliance just finished its big investment plan about a year back. The Birlas, the Tatas and all these other guys just finished it about a couple of years back. And now don't forget, because of NCLT and because of the fact that you have a lot of assets going very cheap, many of these guys will say that why put in a greenfield plant? Why not go out and buy some of these assets at a cheaper cost? And I think that's what is happening. And you've got to allow this to play out. It's not going to happen just because this government wants it or Prime Minister Modi wants it. It's going to happen only when they feel that this is the time to invest and we got demand coming back in the economy. And I don't think we've reached that point yet.
It's going to take some time, and there's nothing that the government can do right now, is Sriram's view. But let's address the other big issue that's been raised by the opposition, that is inflation. And Syed Zafar Islam, you know, even your harshest critic should give credit to this government for concertedly, you know, bringing down inflation, at least over the first 2-3 years of the government. There's some support coming in from the monetary policy, but even on the fiscal side, you know, this government did a few right things. It helped rein in inflation, which is why even for this financial year, you're going to look at an inflation for the full year at about 3.6%, as the finance minister pointed out. But what I'm worried about is over the next 2 years, and one is obviously there is a headwind in the form of higher crude oil prices. You have the pay commission recommendations that are kicking in as well, and that will have a staggering effect on inflation. And then, of course, now this revision of MSP, we still don't know what is going to be the extent of impact that will have on inflation, but multiple factors on account of which the RBI expects inflation to be over 5%. What is this government's projection as far as inflation is concerned? We haven't heard that in the budget. The government says nominal GDP of 11.5%, but how much is real growth, is real GDP, and how much is the inflation projection? We don't know yet. What is this government's expectation on inflation? And given the fact that you're going to get into elections next year, can you afford an inflation of over 5%, a consumer price inflation of over 5%?
So the stated objective of the government is known to everyone, and that's why MPC is there, that we need to maintain the inflation within the band of 2 to 6%, and that is something, it's an objective which has been defined, which has been known to everyone in the marketplace, that government will maintain fiscal inflation within this range, and government has been able to successfully maintain this within this range, and we will continue to maintain within this range as well. But let me just address the earlier question of this growth. The biggest bottleneck in the first few years we have faced, you have to appreciate that this government did not reduce the capex number despite taking the step for fiscal prudence of maintaining reducing the fiscal deficit, but did not reduce the what was there earlier, 1.8% of GDP we maintained for capex. And we also rationalized the subsidies as well. And this year, the biggest concern was the private investment. Private investment primarily because bank was not in a position to lend. And if bank is not in a position to lend, and then when we have an excess capacity in the system, how can you see a growth when we have seen the growth a maximum of 27%, where capex for government capex was 9% and 18% was from private capex. Now it has come down substantially, but we are now that momentum has started, and which is very apparent in PMI number, which is very apparent in factory output number as well. If you see the moving average, then you'll see that a lot of activities has started. So we are very hopeful that the private investment will also happen, because we have recapitalized the bank. That lending capability of the bank, which was missing completely, now it is in order, and now bank will see a lot of projects coming to them, and as well as the private corporates will consider investing now, because they know that there is a bank to lend. Also, the big focus for us, not only the large corporate, but big focus for us, like in US and other countries, we see other developed countries where you lend a lot of money to MSME sectors, and that is something will be
fair enough
focus area. We'll
I understand your thrust on
MSME cluster will fund,
okay,
and we'll see
fair
that a
enough.
lot of growth will take place, because it's a consumption-led economy, and there are a lot of demand at MSME sector as well.
Okay, fair enough. Point taken. But I want to debate inflation first. I know Mohammad Khan has a quick rebuttal, but Mohammad Khan, and I'm not going to go back to Congress's track record in inflation, because I don't want to do what the NDA government is doing a fine job. But I have a specific question: is why is the Congress still continuing to support inflationary policies? For example, MSP revision, bringing it cost plus 50% is a policy that the Congress is saying, why haven't you done it for all these years? The government has now announced it will do it, no matter what the formula is, whether it is A2 plus or is it C2 plus. The fact of the matter is that it will be inflationary, and these are the kind of policies the Congress continues to support.
Well, I don't think it will be inflationary, for the simple fact that it is a very clever sleight of hand. You're very right. A2, A2 plus FL, and C2, right? Now, the MSP plus 50 that they're giving, farmers are protesting because they're saying, Badlav kya hai? This is exactly what you were paying before. In fact, the Congress was paying more than this during the UPA tenure. So that's why if you're saying that came at the cost of inflation, then of course, we are happily willing to take that responsibility, because we did it for the farmers of this nation. But they are not going to bring about any significant change here, and therefore it will not exact any big inflationary pressure. But I feel there is a larger mishandling of the economy, and as a result of the fiscal targets being breached, you will see inflation take place. I want to just say one very quick thing, Sandeep ji, on the issue of investment, which you touched upon. Why has the investment climate dried up over the last 4 years, despite a government seemingly on the right side of economics? That is because you have a tax terrorism policy, and I'll explain why with 2 sentences. One, you have progressively started taxing the middle class and the rich to the hilt, both directly and indirectly. Last year, they introduced a surcharge for the rich. Anyone earning above 50 lakhs would also have to pay a surcharge of 33%. Secondly, they amended the Finance Act to legitimize raids. Earlier, you could question raids in a court of law. They took away that right from every court of law. This is a statement of fact, not of opinion. Now, and this happened in last year's Finance Act, not this year's. Thirdly, look, private investment ratio fell during their tenure to 10 rupees for the private sector for every 100 rupees spent by the government. To give you context, this number was 58 at the peak in 2008 and 9. That means the private sector was investing 58, 60 rupees for every 100 rupees invested by the government. Right. Finally, the biggest litmus test that there is no confidence in this government's ability to perform or deliver on its promises about ease of doing business is that money then started flowing to the stock markets, because that was seen as the best place to invest your money, not government projects, not government ventures, etc. But the stock market, which they have now also taxed with the long-term capital gains.
Okay, Syed Zafar Islam,
this is a talent deficit government.
30 seconds, you raised your hand, but I'm happy to see, Mohammad Khan also speak about, the fact that the policies are anti-rich. You have been targeting this government for being a suit boot ki sarkar, and now you're saying that its policies are anti-rich. So that's anti-middle class,
anti-rich, and
okay, anti-middle class, anti-rich. But Syed Zafar Islam,
say our philosophy, Sandeep ji.
Very quick rebuttal from you, Syed Zafar Islam.
Sandeep ji, our philosophy is very clear, and I'm not hesitant in explaining it to whether he feels
in 30 seconds, please. I need to go to Dr. Virmani.
But we feel that there is a responsibility for rich also to ensure that the poor's interests also been safeguarded by the government. So yes, we all our policies, all our schemes, all our government initiative primarily aimed to benefit the poor people, the farmers, and people who needed to be supported by the government. Yes, there is some element of taxation, yes, for the rich people, because we feel that the rich can afford to that extent, but poor needed more support from the rich people than what they were getting earlier.
First of all,
10 seconds, Mohammad Khan.
Perfect. Let me tell you something. Rich or poor, when you're charging something at 18% GST to 28% GST and you're talking about farming implements such as tractors, then it doesn't come into the tax on the rich category. It comes on the tax on the poorest of the poor, small and marginal farmers. Number two, you talk about the fact that, look, you're going to bring about changes, etc., for small scale laborers and farmers. The truth is your policy itself is stunted. They're all non-starters for the last 4 years. That's why you've come up with this budget this year.
Okay, let's move on. Dr. Virmani, simple question. Another point that P Chidambaram raises, which is what happens if crude tops $75 a barrel? Who will foot the bill?
Yeah, before I do that, very quickly on investment, I think something which is forgotten, because I have done the analysis and it shows that much of the decline in investment is actually household investment in structures, that is housing, commercial, etc. And that is really due to the anti-corruption campaign and all the associated thing. There's a gap. There's a pressure from the top, but the bottom is not changing. Bottom is still corrupt, so the persons are kind of caught in the middle. So that's one point which is often not discussed, but I think is very important if you still want to go back to the very high rates of investment that we had at the peak. That's number one. Secondly, on inflation, you are saying what is the effect of a rise in, so there are obviously
$5 a barrel.
There are two ways in which it can happen. One is that complete, so there's two ways it can happen. Earlier, when it went to the $70 peak, much of that was absorbed by the shared between the oil companies, the government, and price pass through. Now that we supposedly have a liberalization of the both the petrol and diesel pricing, one would expect that this would directly pass through to the consumer, and clearly it will have an impact, some impact on its real income, the income of consumers who have to spend on these items. However, there can be an effect. The government, I think itself, has lowered the excise rate the day of the budget, and have also said they may do so in the future. So to the extent they offset it by lowering excise duties, that means the tax collections will go down, and that will obviously affect the fiscal arithmetic. So what will happen is unclear. As I said, if they stick completely to the pass-through and do part of this as subsidies, you could get an intermediate situation.
Anantha Nageshwaran, is that going to be the biggest challenge for the government this year to tackle with crude? It has zero control over which way crude prices are headed, and on the one hand, because it's taken this, it was easy to liberalize fuel pricing when crude prices are coming down. When crude was at $25 a barrel, it's very easy to liberalize fuel product pricing. But now when it's climbing up, and when you raise excise duty and you've not given the benefit of lower crude prices to the consumers, if you pass it on to the consumer when crude oil prices are going up, there is only up to a point where it will be acceptable. So is that going to be the big challenge? And whatever it does, it will have an implication on the fisc. If it cuts excise duty, that's going to hit the fisc. What does the government do? I think we've lost the audio of Anantha Nageshwaran. I'll try and patch that back. But Sriram, that question comes your way. What does the government do? Because on the one hand, this can lead to a lot of resentment amongst the middle class of this country who feel that we've been taken for a ride. And yet on the other hand, any action will have an implication on the fisc. Can it afford to move away from its stated policy of liberalizing fuel product pricing?
I think, Sandeep, one good news that a lot of people seem to have missed in this market mayhem meltdown that we have seen over the last 1 week or so, that crude prices are already coming down. I think Mr. Jaitley, after presenting the budget last week, spoke about the fact that we are in the outer periphery, or we are near the boundary where we cannot afford high crude prices anymore. But if you look at today's prices, for instance, I think they are down from what they were the previous week, and a lot of it has got to do with what has been happening in the global markets. And if it comes down, and there is another factor also, which is the rising US production, and if it continues to come down and US production increases, and there are real fears about global economy and global growth, then you could see crude no longer at near 70, but probably far lower than that. Then the government will not have this kind of a problem. But yes, the other main point, if crude continues to rise, I think they will be under, they will just have to keep increasing the auto fuel prices. I don't see how they can afford not to do that, especially after liberalizing them. I don't see how they can try and provide any kind of subsidy now. That's obviously not possible. So you got to keep increasing auto fuel prices, and they're already increasing the LPG and the kerosene prices, and kerosene consumption anyway is coming down. So I think the big worry now it's going to be for the government is going to be, okay, what do we do with excise duties? And I'm afraid that if crude continues to climb and we don't have this rosy scenario anymore of higher US production tamping down oil prices, we are going to see the government actually forced to bite the bullet on cutting excise duty. I think they'll have to do that. I don't think they'll have a choice.
Okay, I've got the line back with Anantha Nageshwaran. Do you agree with Sri?
Obviously, it's going to throw all the calculations haywire.
Yeah, Anantha Nageshwaran, do you agree with Sriram there that they have no choice but to cut excise duty on fuel if crude continues to go up?
Yeah, if it continues to go up, that is the big if. I think at some point they will be forced to cut the excise duty, etc. But initially, I think they would pass it on. But the bigger risk is not so much that the crude oil price would keep rising, but I think it would keep falling. And the impact will be because it will dampen global growth and our export prospects, and also sentiment overall will be affected. So I think the biggest risk this year is that the IMF is projecting a synchronized global growth, and India is also expecting a re-acceleration of growth. I think that not happening is a bigger risk than crude oil heading towards $70 or $80. I think the crude oil risk is going to be more manageable than the risk of financial market correction leading to weaker sentiment and lower global growth, hurting sentiment and the revival of faster growth in India. To me, is the bigger risk than crude oil.
It's an important point you're making, that the bigger risk is global growth not keeping pace with the expectations. IMF is talking of 3.9% global growth, and if crude prices come down sharply, then that's not likely to happen. But quick word from Syed Zafar Islam before I take a break. Syed Zafar Islam, what's the government going to do? Will you protect the consumer if crude stays at $70 a barrel?
Well, we are just speculating, because government has also estimated in our budget before presenting it that what is the likely price and what kind of upward pressure crude will have. And based on certain reports, certain assumptions, I'm sure that government has taken that into account in all the budgeted number. But let me also tell you that there are a lot of discussion also around the world that crude prices cannot breach 70 purely because the shale gas will be available, and something which a lot of US investors are willing to fund and to ensure that the shale gas price, crude prices remains at below 70 level. So we are not overly worried, and as one of your panelists has clearly indicated, that crude price is not going to impact badly, and the global reason, particularly the market, is something which is not in our control. It is something to do with the global economy, and if India gets impacted because of the global pressure, like we had seen in 2008 when the global economy had melted down completely, it is something which nobody can take into account while deciding the budget number. You have to assume certain things, but everything you cannot assume unless some uncertainties does unfold going forward.
One of the other objections raised by the Congress party is on the corporate tax rate cut to 25%, largely for small and medium enterprises with a turnover of less than 250 crores. Mohammad Khan, what is the objection here? In fact, if anything, economists have criticized the fact that they haven't done it for all corporates and they've only done it for corporations with a turnover of less than 250 crores. But why is the Congress party objecting to it when, as a finance minister pointed out, the DTC, which was tabled when Mr. Chidambaram was a finance minister, clearly made a case of a sharp cut in corporate tax rates for everyone?
You remember Chidambaram's dream budget in 1997? The reason it was called the dream budget is because it did a fantastic balancing act of cutting corporate rates while at the same time lowering personal income tax rates. It was premised on the idea that one man's expenditure is another man's income, and we are better judges of how to spend our own money. And he trusted the people of India to do that. And of course, the results were there for everyone to see. We experienced previously unheard of economic growth and set us on that path. I think they should have cut income tax rates. This was something everybody was looking forward to. This was a time when they could have given a relief to the middle class. That's why we say that this government doesn't think things through. I want to say two things very, very quickly. I don't know why the BJP representative on your channel says that they do not anticipate oil prices rising. As you very rightly pointed out, Sandeep, and I begrudgingly must admit you took away my point. Mr. Jaitley himself on the floor of Parliament suggested that that is a cause of concern. In his own words, he said, what will you do if oil prices rise? He has therefore put it in the realm of possibility. You could not predict oil going up to $70 a barrel now. Similarly, you cannot predict on the basis of some hypothetical anecdotal data that shale is catching up and so on and so forth, that oil prices will remain constant. My bigger worry is this. You have reaped a glorious benefit from low oil prices, somewhere to the tune of 2,50,000 crores to 3 lakh crores. You are asked to pass that benefit on to the consumers. You give vague answers as to how that money is being spent. Till date, we have no particular clue of how that money is being spent. In fact, if I ask you now, you'll say rural infrastructure, but you will fail to provide details of the same. I want to say this. You were blessed with three things. Global, just one last sentence. You were blessed with three things: low oil prices, a global economy that was on the rise, and a majority in the Lok Sabha, something that people had not seen for 30 years. What have you done? What is the act of imagination you've done in the last 4 years, other than a little bit of jugglery here and there in the name of structural reforms? आपने घर जला दिया, कह रहे हैं आपने ताले बदल दिए. NPAs have increased under your watch.
Fair enough.
Tell me what you've done.
We've got a lot of ground to cover. I don't have much time on the show. Sriram,
Sandeep, can I just come in?
Syed Zafar Islam, I'll come to you, but let me just go to Sriram and Dr. Virmani, and then I'll come to you. Sriram, because I want to cover a few other topics again raised by the Congress party by former Finance Minister. Sriram, one is on tax rate projections. Now, the government is expecting nominal GDP to grow at 11.5% and gross tax revenue growth of 16.7%. Given the current climate, are they being too ambitious? Is that too aggressive a target?
I think if you look at the way the economy is projected to grow next year, and the government probably thinks that the economy will clearly bounce back from last year's slump, that is 17-18 slump, they are clearly expecting three things to happen. One, they're expecting the economy to grow faster, and they're expecting indirect tax revenue to grow faster as well, despite whatever changes they may make in GST. And they're also expecting the benefits of demonetization, which is in the form of higher tax filings and higher income tax filings, to come through as well. So I don't want to get into too much of nitty-gritty details about how much the tax base will be next year and whether they will meet 16% or not, but I think this is the thinking behind what they are trying to do. And if the economy really does pick up, and if we have private investment coming back in some form, or we really have growth coming back in the first 6-8 months of next year, we could see tax collections going up, and I think that's clearly something that that is what they're aiming for. And we don't know how this will pan out. I think we'll have to just wait and see. Maybe by say July, August, we'll probably have a better idea of how things are going.
By July, August, we'll have, it's too early to take a call on whether 16.7% growth is possible or not. But Dr. Virmani, for this to happen, much hinges on GST, goods and services taxes, and the government is projecting a growth of 67.31% in GST collections. It's projecting corporate tax rates to grow by 10.15%, income tax collections to grow by a little under 20%, but over 67% growth in GST collections. Is that feasible? Is that realistic?
So, I don't think that 67% you're comparing like to like. If you take the months for which the GST has come in, then the number will be different. Anyway, whatever a little analysis I have done of GST shows that it's actually doing very well. The problem has been that people have been ignoring the seasonality of indirect tax collections and looking at monthly averages. So if you look carefully at the corresponding months, you'll find that GST actually has already started producing and will likely do even better from April onwards. So I am not really concerned or worried about the GST collections. Part of it is because the initial hiccup, something which economists like me who have worked on VAT systems for a long time had been urging that to simplify in the GST law, not the constitution. I think the constitutional amendment was fine. But anyway, given that their experience in the first 4-5 months, They have started simplifying, and it depends on the GST Council. I think even the GST Council is now convinced that a simpler system with not that many 28% rates will actually produce even more revenues, because compliance becomes easier, reporting and filing becomes easier, and even checking, cross-checking, etc. Everything becomes easier if you simplify the system. And all the indications from the GST Council are that the message has gone through and will act on it.
Okay, fair enough. A quick point from you, Anantha Nageshwaran. I know it's a slightly philosophical question, but I still want to touch upon it, raised again by P Chidambaram when he's asking what is the philosophy of taxation of this government, because GST is what it's expecting it to grow. I suppose he's referring to the fact that the government is banking more on indirect tax revenue, which are by nature regressive. So do you see any merit in that argument at all, or does any government in this position would bet on GST to give a fillip to revenues?
No, I think that question is a bit wrong, because from his point of view, the government has indeed raised reintroduced the tax on long-term capital gains, and that is a direct tax, and that cannot be criticized at the same time. And then you say indirect taxes dependence is rising, and also there is now a clamor for saying that the personal income tax rate should have been lowered. But we know from the economic survey of 2015-16 that India's number of taxpayers is 4 million, whereas it should be around 23 million. And even if you adjust for democracy, the direct tax to GDP ratio is on the lower side. So I think, and also the economic survey of 2015-16 showed that the tax exemption threshold has risen far faster than the average per capita income. So I don't think there was a particular case, and if anything, the case for a higher personal income tax exemption comes only because we have had double-digit inflation for 5 years between 2009 and 2014. So, I don't think the GST versus the direct tax debate is the right way to frame it. GST should be seen as facilitating the creation of a single market and higher potential GDP growth, which in turn will also improve the direct tax collection. So what the government has done with the long-term capital gains tax is actually showing that the proportion of direct to indirect taxes is being kept in mind.
12 questions raised by Parnepan Chidambaram. We've tried to answer many of them. The panel agrees with him on a few issues and strongly disagrees with him on a few issues. Syed Zafar Islam, I'm running out of time, but I'll give you a last word. And it's a very simple question, which is, who has budget 2018 pleased? Corporates aren't happy. I mean, they will say 10 on 10 on television channels like ET now, but they're not happy because you haven't brought down corporate tax rates for large corporates. Stock markets are clearly not happy, as is evident. Economists, well, no matter what you do, you can never please them. So I'm trying to understand who have, and Mohammed Khan says even farmers aren't happy. The Congress says MSP revision is a jumla. So I'm trying to understand who have you pleased with budget 2018.
Let me respond.
Very quickly.
Let me respond. Away from the remarks from the opposition, let me respond to the question you have posed. First of all, the corporate tax rate has been reduced from 30% to 25% for companies which has turnover up to 250 crore. With this covers 99% of the corporate sector as well. About the large corporate, 7,000 odd number which we have, which has a turnover beyond 250 crore. I think that they enjoy various other tax benefits and tax holidays, and if you take into account all the exemptions,
Zafar, I heard that. I heard the finance minister say that today.
Their weighted average tax rate comes to 22%. So
okay.
Nobody can claim. So let me second thing.
Okay.
Second thing, in terms of GST revenue and the tax to GDP ratio, what you are talking about. In fact, that the comparison at 67% is wrong, because the GST number, GST started only implemented in July, so that's only 8-month number is there. That too, the March number will actually get to know in April. Third thing which is important, that
is it not true that you had a revenue shortfall of 50,000 crores this month?
Disinvestment number was talking about, that disinvestment number was saying that we are conservative. Yes, we are conservative, and we could have given our track record. We have this year of 1 lakh crore, 2017. We could have, instead of 80,000, we could have
saved your last year to meet all your targets.
We are a little conservative. We know that we can. Okay. We are capable of delivering it. We have proven track record. We can go beyond that.
I don't think much has changed in the last year.
Even in tax collection, because the informal economy will
become part of
the formal economy. GST will be the game changer. the aim changer and Congress party who has failed to criticize government
Sir,
on
Congress
economic
party has not been in power for the last 4 years.
The rhetoric, the world has
except
ratified
rhetoric,
and revalidated all our initiatives,
Zafar
and
Islam.
the world has also that's the reason why we
Islam
have been
this is an
upgraded
economic
as well.
debate.
Okay, Zafar Islam, here's the thing. Whether or not the budget manages to kickstart the economy, whether or not it takes us back to the 8% growth trajectory, time will tell. I don't think, we can pass the verdict right now. But what it does is political messaging, and I think the objective was not to please corporates, was not to please markets, was not to please probably even the middle class, was to send a signal to your to the voter, and that has happened with Budget 2018, and that I don't think my panel is going to disagree with me on that. Completely timed out on this edition of the India Development Debate. Thank you so much, Dr. Virmani, for joining us live on this edition of the show. To Ananta Nageshwaran, Sriram as well. Wonderful having you live from the Economic Times office in Mumbai, and of course to Syed Zafar Islam and Mohammad Khan for that fiery debate on Budget 2018. Up next is Top 10 at 10. Keep it